While others fall asleep peacefully, one restless mind stays awake, replaying every word, every choice, discovering the strange brain pattern that turns intelligence into endless overthinking. The room was quiet, illuminated only by the soft yellow light of a small lamp sitting on a wooden desk. Outside the window, the night felt calm and peaceful. A slow wind moved gently through the trees, and the distant hum of the city sounded like a quiet whisper in the background. Most of the people in the neighborhood were already asleep, their homes dark and silent. But one window was still glowing. Inside that room, someone sat in a chair, staring at a notebook on the desk. Only a few unfinished lines were written on the page, leaving most of it empty. The page looked quiet and still, but the mind behind it was anything but calm. Thoughts were moving quickly, faster than the slow ticking of the clock on the wall, and faster than the occasional cars passing outside. The mind kept asking questions. Did that conversation earlier sound strange? Was that decision the right one? What if things go wrong tomorrow? What if something important was missed? The thoughts came one after another, like waves constantly touching the shore, never stopping. Nothing dramatic had happened during the day. It had been a normal day filled with simple moments, a small conversation with someone, a minor decision about work, and a message that perhaps could have been written differently. For most people, these moments would already be forgotten, but not here. In this mind, everything replayed again and again. Every word spoken earlier returned like scenes from a movie. The tone of voice, the pause between sentences, the expression on someone's face. The brain studied the moment repeatedly, wondering if the words sounded wrong, if the silence lasted too long, or if the meaning had been misunderstood. The mind kept trying to solve something that had already passed. This pattern had existed for years. At first it seemed like a useful ability, being able to notice details, think deeper than others, and understand situations from many different angles. Teachers once called it intelligence, and friends sometimes laughed and said, "You think about things too deeply," but no one really saw what happened after the conversations ended. No one saw the long nights or heard the quiet arguments that took place inside the mind. Because when everything around the room became silent, the brain became louder. The notebook slowly filled with small thoughts, questions, possibilities, and new ideas. But soon after, doubts appeared about those same ideas. The person leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, where the white paint reflected the warm light of the lamp and created soft shadows across the room. The air felt still and slightly heavy. A quiet question appeared in the mind. Why was it always working like this? Other people seemed comfortable with uncertainty. They made decisions quickly and moved forward without looking back. But here, every possibility needed to be explored. If a choice existed, the mind wanted to understand every possible outcome. What could happen tomorrow? What might happen next year? Or what could change if one small detail were different? It felt like holding a map with endless roads. Most people simply chose a path and started walking. But this mind stayed at the center of the map, studying every road carefully, searching for the safest and most perfect one. Sometimes that search never ended. The clock ticked again. It was 11:48 p.m. Suddenly the mind returned to something small that happened earlier in the afternoon. Short conversation where someone had asked a simple question. The answer seemed normal at the time, but now the brain examined it again. Maybe another response would have been better. Maybe the words could have sounded smarter. Maybe the silence afterward meant something important. The mind analyzed every detail like a scientist studying a complicated puzzle. At first glance, it looked like simple worry. But something deeper was happening. The brain was searching for patterns. The same brain that solved problems quickly, understood ideas deeply, and noticed hidden details, refused to let questions remain unanswered. It wanted clarity and certainty. But life rarely offers perfect certainty, and that is where the quiet struggle begins. When a powerful mind meets an uncertain world, something strange happens. The mind keeps thinking and thinking and thinking. Sometimes it even creates problems that never truly existed. A small comment becomes a possible misunderstanding. A simple decision becomes a life-changing moment. A quiet pause in a conversation becomes a mystery waiting to be solved. The brain tries to protect the future by analyzing the past, yet instead of finding peace, it often creates even more questions. The person stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The glass felt cool against their hand. Outside, streetlights stretched long golden lines across the empty road, and a few leaves drifted gently along the sidewalk. Everything outside looked calm and quiet. But inside the mind, ideas still moved quickly. The strange truth was that this same mind also created beautiful things. It imagined possibilities others never noticed. It connected ideas in surprising ways and understood emotions hidden behind simple words. During the day, that ability looked like intelligence. But during quiet nights, it felt like noise to many thoughts, too many possibilities, too many unanswered questions. Eventually, the person returned to the desk and closed the notebook. For a moment, the room became completely still. No writing, no movement, just the sound of breathing and the steady ticking of the clock. In that small moment of silence, a gentle realization appeared. Maybe the mind was not broken. Maybe it was simply powerful enough to see more patterns than most people, powerful enough to imagine many futures at once, and powerful enough to understand things deeply. But without direction, that same power could turn inward, like a bright light pointing back at itself. The mind had been trying to protect, predict, and prepare for everything. It simply did not know when to stop. Outside the window, the night continued peacefully. The world was not asking for perfect answers. It was simply moving forward. The person looked again at the notebook on the desk, and for the first time that night, the mind became slightly quieter, not completely silent, but softer. A new question appeared. Not why can't the mind stop thinking, but something gentler. What if this mind was never the problem? And that small thought slowly opened the door to a very different understanding, the kind that might soon change everything. The room was still quiet, and the small lamp on the desk continued to glow with the same soft yellow light. Outside the window, the night had grown deeper. The wind had slowed, and the street looked almost frozen in silence. Yet something inside the room had begun to change. The person remained sitting in the same chair, looking at the closed notebook on the desk. The thoughts that had once rushed through the mind like a storm were still there somewhere, but they were no longer overwhelming. They had slowed down. They felt gentler. For years, the mind had been treated like a problem that needed fixing. Every restless night seemed like proof that something was wrong. Too many thoughts, too many questions, too much thinking. But the realization from a few moments earlier had planted a quiet idea. What if the mind was not the enemy? Slowly, the person opened the notebook again. The blank page waited patiently beneath the warm light, with the pen resting beside it. Instead of immediately writing another list of worries or questions, the person simply stared at the page. The silence felt unusual at first. Normally, the brain would rush to fill every empty moment with analysis. But tonight felt different. After a moment, the person picked up the pen and wrote a single sentence. "The mind is trying to protect me." The words looked simple, yet they carried a surprising truth. Every thought that had appeared earlier, the worries, the replays, the endless analysis, had come from the same place. The mind was trying to understand the world, trying to predict what might happen, trying to avoid mistakes, and trying to make life better. The real problem had never been thinking itself. The problem was that the thinking never had a place to rest. The mind had been running like a machine that never received the signal to stop. Leaning back in the chair, the person noticed that the thoughts no longer felt like enemies. Instead, they felt like messages. The brain was simply doing what it was designed to do: notice patterns, solve problems, and imagine possibilities. Something important had been missing all those years: direction. Without direction, the mind explored every path at once. But with direction, the same mind could become powerful. Turning to a new page in the notebook, the person wrote another line. Thinking is not the problem. Uncontrolled thinking is. Outside, a distant car passed slowly along the road. Its headlights briefly moved across the wall before disappearing into the darkness again. The room returned to stillness. A memory surfaced from years earlier when someone had once said, "Your mind is special." At the time, it sounded like a compliment, but the hidden meaning had never been explained. A powerful mind is like a bright light. If the light points outward, it helps someone see the world clearly. But if it constantly points inward, it can become blinding. That had been the pattern all along. The mind had been pointing inward, too often studying every conversation, replaying every decision, and analyzing every possible mistake. Looking again at the notebook, the person noticed that the page was still mostly empty, but now it felt like a beginning rather than a burden. The pen moved again, and another sentence appeared. What if the mind needs guidance, not silence? The idea felt surprising. For years, the goal had always been the same, to stop thinking. But perhaps that was never the right goal. A powerful mind does not easily become quiet. Instead, it becomes focused. The person stood up and walked toward the window again. Outside, the streetlights continued to shine softly on the empty road, and the same trees moved gently in the cool night air. Nothing in the outside world had changed, yet inside, something had shifted. The mind was beginning to understand itself. Overthinking had never been random. It followed a pattern. Whenever uncertainty appeared, the brain tried to solve it. Whenever a small doubt appeared, the brain expanded it into many possibilities. It behaved like a detective that refused to close a case until every clue had been examined. But life is filled with mysteries that cannot be solved immediately, and a mind that tries to solve everything at once eventually becomes exhausted. Returning to the desk, the person noticed that the notebook now contained only a few short sentences. Yet they felt more meaningful than the many long pages written on previous nights. It did a fighting the mind. The person began asking it better questions. Not about the past, and not about imaginary future problems, but simple questions about the present moment. What actually happened today? What truly matters right now? What is one small step forward? The mind paused. It was not used to those kinds of questions. For a moment, the thoughts slowed again. The brain realized that most of its earlier worries had been about things that could no longer be changed, conversations already finished, decisions already made, and moments that were already gone. The present moment, however, had always been quiet, and somehow it had been ignored. The person closed the notebook gently and placed the pen beside it. The clock on the wall now showed 12:27 a.m. Normally this would be the hour when thinking became even louder. But tonight the room felt different. The mind still held many ideas, possibilities, and questions, yet they no longer felt like a storm. They felt like toadstools that could be used carefully instead of endlessly. Walking toward the lamp, the person lowered its brightness slightly. The yellow light softened across the room. Outside the window, the sky looked darker, but also calmer. For the first time in a long while, the mind stopped searching for perfect answers. Instead, it accepted something simple. A thoughtful mind will always think deeply. That is its nature. But depth does not have to become a prison. It can become understanding, creativity, and even wisdom. The person lay down on the bed and looked quietly at the ceiling. A few thoughts still drifted through the mind, but they no longer demanded immediate answers. They could wait. Tomorrow would come, and the mind would continue thinking, imagining, and exploring. But now, it would also learn something new: when to pause, when to observe, and when to let a thought pass like a cloud moving through the sky. The same mind that once created endless overthinking had begun turning into something calmer, clearer, and wiser. Not because the thoughts had disappeared, but because the person had finally learned how to walk beside them instead of being chased by them. And in that quiet moment, the room finally felt peaceful. Not silent, but peaceful.